everyone, we're talking with Simonia Blassingame. She is a wife, mother, sister, aunt, friend, entrepreneur, and child of God. And Simonia is going to be talking to us about how to craft happy, healthy, and sustainable careers, how to be a superhero, how to achieve greatness, how to rise above those flaws, imperfections, obstacles that you can use to your advantage. Simonia, glad to be talking to you.
Hey, thank you so much, Robert. It's a pleasure to be here.
It is a pleasure to have you. And so you have all kinds of crazy, interesting things in the work. You have a mission, you have a purpose, you are a speaker, you're working on your signature talk. So what is your big idea? What has been happening in your world lately? What has you fired up?
Right. So lots of things have me fired up. I am a very curious person. I love learning things. I love meeting new people. So lots of things fire me up. But the thing that sort of I've determined I'm most passionate about is helping women and focusing my energies and efforts on gender equality. And I've been thinking a lot about why that is. Some of it has to do with the fact that I went to an all women's college where I learned and appreciated sort of the first time the benefits of sisterhood. Another reason is because I was in the military for 25 years. I was on active duty in the U.S. Navy, and I retired after 25 years, which you all know is a very male-dominated industry. So as a woman in that space, I had to find ways to sort of be encouraged, encourage myself, and encourage others to follow me. So those are the things that are really lighting me up, and we'll talk about a little later. I hope this idea I have about finding the superhero in you.
And I like your idea. And so just to make sure that we understand what the current situation is, what's the big problem? Like we've always heard about how women get paid less in the workplace or deal with all kinds of struggles and in the military, but you also hear that there is always like some progress being made, but it seems to be very slow. So what is the current situation as far as like women and where they are and what sort of difficulties they're facing these days?
Right. So I will speak a little bit about the military in the sense that we have made some amazing strides. I will say out of most industries, the military really is probably one of the best examples about gender pay inequality as an example. So as a particular rank, I am going to be paid the same as my counterparts, male, and it doesn't matter, right? There are bonuses and things based on specialty, but again, those are not gender specific. So in the military, as an example, we definitely have gender pay and parity. Some of the challenges though come in with the recruiting of women in certain specialties and fields. For a long time, women were excluded from combat roles. Well, most of those have been lifted, and now we can serve in lots of different fields and communities. And so what we're hoping to do now is introduce those to women and maybe sort of pull back the barrier where folks, now know you can serve openly in lots of different career fields to get more parity in some of the more coveted roles. Now, what we find in the military is that some of your more combat-based positions, as an example, are the ones that go on and become the Joint Chiefs of Staffs and the leaders and commanders of major units. And so having not been allowed into those career fields before, that would have stymied some of our promotion opportunity and sort of given us a ceiling. I was a restricted line officer in the Navy and a human resources officer. So I spent a lot of time kind of studying the manpower and personnel situation. And that right now, I think, is an exciting time for women in the military to think about military service.
And so as far as you personally, maybe when you were coming up in the ranks or you were getting your life and your career figured out, did you personally come across any just real difficult, I don't know, trials and tribulations? Were there any like places that you were like you felt stopped, held back, slowed down because of who you were at any point?
Oh, sure. And I would say almost even from the beginning. I mean, one of my very first memories was being at my first duty station, and I had a young sailor who was probably about at the enlisted pay grade 6 level, E6. He'd probably been in about 20 years. And he just wasn't vibing with me. He didn't like me. And at that point, I didn't know if it was because I was Black. I didn't know if because I was a woman or because I had been on the earth as long as he'd been in the Navy, or some combination of the three. But what I learned from that experience was I couldn't focus on the people who didn't want me there as much as I had to focus on serving and showing up and doing the very best in the situation that I found myself in. And so, but it was also a very lonely time. Sometimes I would look around in the room and there would not be another woman in the room. There would not be another Black officer in the room. And so you're constantly striving and thinking about, is this the right place for me, because I don't see representation around me. Maybe this isn't for me. So I definitely faced lots of those moments in my career. I think one of the things that saved me the most is sort of tapping back into who I was, what my strengths were. I knew I had value. I knew I was bringing value to the organization, but in order for that to be recognized, I would have to show up. And so once I stopped pretending to be the officer I thought they wanted to see, and more about, well, who am I? My career really did take off. I call it being a late bloomer. And once I sort of tapped into that, my career really did take off.
And I think that that's relatable for a lot of people, because I think that we've all gone through like jobs, businesses, activities that felt really thankless. And many times, and even that situation you're mentioning there of, if you were just not gelling with someone and you wonder, is it because of any of these things that I have no control over? Do they just not like me? It can drive you crazy. And then the conclusion that you arrived at of kind of, there's like the two parts of it. There's serving and focusing on the people who do appreciate you, who are helping, and also in a way embracing your uniqueness and letting go of that idea that I need to blend in or I need to conform. And you and I were talking about this a few minutes ago, about this like superhero concept that you have of, wearing the cape and saying that, well, there's a reason why I have these strengths and weaknesses. And instead of trying to be a person that I'm not, or a person that I should not be, then I should use this concept of standing out to be this really incredible person who does these amazing things and helps people. So can you tell me about this superhero idea that you have and how that came about?
Yes, I'd love to. So part of the origin story for me started with when I met my husband while I was a student, and I'm a lover of capes in the fall, and I love the layered look, and I would often wear capes all the time. And my husband one day asked me about the meeting, and I was like, "What meeting?" And he was like, "The Justice League. Clearly, you have your cape on. You must be on your way to a superhero conference or a superhero meeting." And we laughed about it, but that turned into sort of a running joke. So at work, when I would run into a character at work where they, like you said before, where the personalities weren't gelling, I would call them my arch nemesis. And then we got into, well, let's start naming them. What kind of a villain are they? Are they a minor villain or a super villain? And then what kind of superhero am I going to be to sort of combat that? And that's really where that story came from. But if folks in the listening audience are aware, and think about it, when you think about superheroes in the comic books or the movies and TV shows that we know, they are themselves, but then they tap into some extra power that they have inside, and they become greater than they were. They don't change. They don't become a different person as much as they become an elevated form of themselves. And that's what I did. I used a lot of personality testing to tap into the things that I liked and didn't like. It helped me define which types of jobs I would go into, even though people would say, oh, you have to take this certain assignment. If you do really well in this, it could be the queen maker job that'll set you up for the rest of your career. But because I was now tapped into my personal compass, I also knew that my personality wasn't going to lend itself well to that role. And just as easily as I could be made, I could be, I could ruin my career as well for not performing well. And so I learned to make decisions based on my strengths and not what other people thought were something else. I also didn't focus as much on my weaknesses as much as I used my strengths to sort of mitigate that.
That's interesting to think about as far as strengths and weaknesses, because like something that clicked in my mind a few years ago was someone mentioned to me that what makes superheroes interesting is the weakness, is the things like the kryptonite, or like the Joker always messing up the Batman's day. And so when you describe this idea here of the like the superhero mindset, as far as using that to decide what path in life to take, or what decisions to make, what comes to mind is that all these superhero like plots and stories, they involve like kind of courage and being like thrown into something even if you're not 100% ready, like the chemical spill happens, or they get
Right.
irradiated. Like there are, as you mentioned, an origin story where you just kind of get thrown into something and then you figure it out anyway. And also like just this idea of like the challenge where they're always kind of figuring out how to control this power. Maybe the power only works sometimes, or there are limitations, or it's too much. So it's really interesting to think about that. It's, well, don't always go for the like the miserable choice or the safe choice. Do what stretches you, and what also might not always make logical sense, but is kind of the more like exciting, action-packed thing to do.
Of course. And then it's funny you bring up Batman and the Joker. They are one of the signature pairs that I talk about in my signature talk. When I use, my company is called Sane Leadership Inc., and that's where I do my personal coaching and personality coaching and speaking to many different groups for leaders, emerging leaders, uh, executives, about how to use and harness the superhero power. But one of the cool things about that particular pairing that I talk about in my talk is that Batman uses something to go against his arch nemesis, the Joker, at his disposal. Because if folks who know anything about that story, I don't think we're giving anything away. Batman isn't inherently born with any special gifts, but he has some really cool toys at his disposal, and he got those toys from his allies, right? He has Alfred. He also has a great sidekick in Robin, right? And so he's tapping into something that he has access to, which is his allies, to help him defeat his enemies. And so that's just one of the, I won't give it all away, but that's just one of the things we talk about in terms of harnessing your strengths and mitigating your weaknesses. Having somebody watch your six, so to speak, is definitely a trick of Batman's for sure.
Yeah, that's interesting to think about, that we need to have that support system. It's easy to oversimplify and say, well, this superhero, this is just about this person. This is just Superman. This is just Batman. But you're so right. They have a team of other people with other skills to kind of sum up that whole there. And also, another thing that comes to mind is that there's so many superheroes. I can't remember the total, but I think there's
It's a
like
lot.
17,000 Marvel characters, or something.
The
And
universe is vast.
like, yeah, a huge universe, and they all have like unique powers. And you think that after a while they'd run out of ideas or kind of start to copy it, but there's always that uniqueness. And I imagine that. So you mentioned already that there's the benefit of like dealing with the villains, but then also there's kind of the problem solved of not over comparing yourself to someone else, because like we all have other things going on, and it's easy. Like even you mentioned before how you weren't sure if the conflict you dealt with was the age, right? So it's easy to
Right.
see someone who might be doing better than you, and they're younger, but then you have to remember to kind of unplug and not play that comparison game. And so a lot of these things in your superhero kind of analogy metaphor here like help to kind of shine a light on that, and like kind of take things that it's easy to say don't compare yourself to others, but then you say, well, would you compare Batman to Superman? Well, no, because they have their own strengths and weaknesses.
Right.
They're on their own path. They have their own purposes.
Right, for sure. And I think that has been the most important part of the journey, which is why I love particularly mentoring women that are starting out in their careers in like the, young 20s, 30s, because you're figuring things out. And oftentimes you go into these spaces again, like I found myself in, and you're not sure how to measure up. And so you're comparing yourself to other people and trying to imitate potential role models or people who are in positions that you aspire to, without understanding that maybe you should be modeling yourself after the performance standards, if those are clear and outlined, and making sure you line up with those as opposed to the people, because the way people show up at work is based on their individual strengths. And so I'm an extroverted type of person, and I love innovation and I love creativity. I love coming up with new ideas. I never met a boundary I didn't want to push up against, right? And then there are other folks that are really compliance oriented, really focused in on what they can see, sense, taste, smell, very focused on that. And so if I were watching someone with a sensory superpower, I might be tempted to try to do it the way they do it. I'm just not wired that way. I can't. And so the danger of comparing yourself to other people is you're comparing yourself against their strengths. And if those don't match or align with yours, you're going to do yourself and your organization a disservice. You're never going to measure up. It's more different. It's almost like when we talk about writing. If I wanted to improve my penmanship, I would work on my dominant hand that I use, as opposed to trying to make my less dominant hand more legible. The easiest way to do it is just never try to sign with my less dominant hand, and it's just faster, and we can move on. And so that's kind of what I talk to people about when they're looking at comparison, is thinking about your dominance. What are your dominant traits, and lean into those instead.
And I like that, and like that idea a lot. And that's come up a couple of times already of focusing on strengthening your strengths, not necessarily on strengthening your weaknesses, because that drove me crazy as a kid when I would have to take all these classes or be in these sports. And the only reason was, well, just to improve this thing that you're bad at. Well, I'm bad at it because I don't like it. And so having heard that, it seems like you're giving us the go ahead to maybe embrace the messiness of life, because it's easy to say, well, here's all my categories and here's all my levels and everything's perfectly balanced. And that doesn't sound like fun at all. What sounds like more fun is having more of a crazy adventurous life, where maybe you say these certain areas are not important to me, or not important to me right now, and I want to focus more on having fun, or this career or this hobby. Is that on the right track as far as like being okay with an imbalanced life?
It is, and what you will find is not even so much as balance. You will find what I call this thing called flow. When we were kids, and I'm a parent, so I have exposed my daughter and my nephew to lots of different activities. Some they took to, some not so much. And in those environments, you ask them to try it again, do it a little better, because you're in a process of growing and figuring out who you are and what your likes and dislikes are. At some point, they are going to settle in a thing where, for example, my daughter's not a sports person. She does like volleyball. And so we leaned into that's her sport, but she's tried soccer, and, we talked about track, but she's not very fast. So we did all of those things for her to finally find the sport that she liked best. Same thing for my nephew. He found himself naturally athletic, but he's leaned now into golf. He's really a gifted golfer. And so the difference in that approach, even as a mentor or someone to your mentee, asking people to try different things to see if they're good at it or like it or have any type of natural abilities is okay. You just don't have to stay there. Pretty soon whether you're going to be into something or not. And so if you're not into spreadsheets, stop offering to build those. If you hate attention to detail, then you can't be the secretary or the scribe in the meetings. That's just not going to fit for you. Find something else to do based on who you are.
I like that a lot. Try different things, see what grows, see what evolves, figure out what things are difficult, but also fun, and also get you to power through the difficult parts, and versus those things that just aren't working, versus those things that make you miserable. And it seems like there's a lot of kind of like taking inventory and introspection. And so I want to kind of talk about how you've mentioned that you now mentor young women who are kind of getting started in their career and in the workplace. And are you noticing a lot of like similarities with your own paths here, or do they have unique challenges or anything new that you did not go through? Like, what are kind of the similarities and the differences when you're mentoring these young women?
So that's a great question. So yes, there are similarities, which in some ways saddens me in terms of the space of change. For example, I was talking to a young mentee about a couple of weeks ago, and she was having some difficulty with some of her colleagues in the workplace, and she was challenging or questioning whether she should speak up or speak out. She doesn't want to be known as the one who's always, quote unquote, got the problem. She's also a Black female in the military, and she didn't want to come off as being angry. There's a lot of, tension in the area post the George Floyd murder, and then now the trial. And so she's very conscious about sort of race relations, right? And she doesn't want to be the diversity coach for her group. She just wants to work. But so she was wondering, should she say something or not? The thing that was interesting to me, because I've had that experience many times in my career, they were in a group chat. Well, that wasn't a thing when I was coming along, so to speak, where you would be in this all the time information age where you were getting constant feedback, or you were finding things out about the people you work with because you were connected on social media. So I think that is a very new difference with this generation. Is not something that I had to face. And I think it's even more critical, I think, which is why I leaned into this coaching earlier. Before it would say, you could offer, hey, just kind of stumble along, figure it out. But because technology, things are happening so fast, I think it's important to reach out to people. It's early, and to say, hey, let's talk about how you're wired, whether this leads you down a path of which college to go to, what you want to major and master in, or what have you. Knowing this up front can just help you in your building blocks and build better relationships. One of the other things I usually coach people on is conflicts dynamics. And I took this test late in my career, but what I found from it, what my hot buttons were, and that's not something we typically think about. What's the thing that we call it pet peeves, but what's the thing that really gets under your skin? For me, what I found is I get really irritated with bullies. And so this, when I do the coaching about the superhero, we always go back to your origin stories too. We talk about how you were raised, what experiences and things sort of help shape who you are and how you are. And because of an early experience I had in elementary school, really cemented for me to be a person to stand up to bullies. And as an HR professional, I really got a chance to do that a lot and act as a buffer between employees and employers and managers and supervisors, and to make sure that people didn't abuse their power in those cases. And so now that I know that, once I knew that, then I could be ready to sort of handle the emotional rush of adrenaline that would happen when those situations would flare up. Before that, I wasn't really conscious of it. And so things like that, I think, help people in these situations where you find yourself as another or uncertain about the dynamics. Knowing what your triggers are or what your hot buttons are can certainly help you navigate that in a smoother way.
I like that a lot. That's an excellent way of positioning this this thing that happens a lot. Because when you were explaining that, what came to mind for me was I don't like laziness. Like, even if I feel like I'm being lazy, I'm really mad at myself. And I make sure, like, if I have a down day in any kind of way, I'm like, I'll do double the next day. Like, I'm the kind of person where if I go to put gas in the gas tank, I'm filling that thing all the way up. Why half-ass it? Why be lazy? And so when you mention this idea of the origin story, I like that labeling a lot, because it's like a more, I don't know, like a more like positive context, because people talk about things like, well, childhood trauma or the way you were brought up. And for some reason, what I imagine is there's like childhood, like way over there, and it's like decades ago, and then this huge gap, and then your adulthood. But like the origin story, that might, I mean, part of that might include like young adulthood or mid adulthood, and it just seems like a more positive way of looking at it, as opposed to, I'm so sad, my upbringing was so difficult. And it seems like if those things that made you who you are your origin story, then there can be a payoff, right? Because there's always the thinking of, well, if I had this bad experience where I was stuck in this group project and these people didn't do their part and I had to scramble in order to save the day, but I felt so overworked, but also like not thanked, then instead of that being a thing that always bugs you, you can say, well, if that's my origin story, then the person that I then grew into later can then fulfill or fix that problem or help others out with this problem that I struggled with initially. And so it makes me feel more positive about my past or my mistakes. And it feels like I'm not just dwelling on the past. I'm saying, what was the mistake in the future, and how can I maybe not even fix it, but make it worthwhile, make the difficulty back then worth all that hassle, all that headache.
For sure. Like just as you mentioned, because that's part of who you are now, when you work in projects with other people with deadlines, you want to know that they're pulling their weight. So up front, as part of the negotiation and the agreement to go into collaboration with someone, you'll have to talk about what does it look like to miss deadlines, or to not meet your expectations, and maybe create clauses or phrases that say, if these things don't happen in this way, we agree to part company, amicably, and move on to the next, right? And so now you've built in a system that allows you to be true to who you are. That's a button for you, and doesn't give the person a surprise at the end when they haven't met your whatever it is, even if they believe it's unrealistic expectations, because you guys have talked about it up front. Everybody's come to an agreement, and so it's no longer a thing. And just like we talked about our favorite superhero today, Batman, he grew up, depending on which version you watch, knowing that his parents were killed, which clearly is a childhood trauma. But part of his origin story now is swooping in and helping people who can't seem to help themselves, right? And so that's just part of his origin story. Would he have become Batman had that not happened? Maybe, but probably not, right?
And so this idea you have is really making a lot of sense, because it drives me crazy when someone says, well, everyone's unique, because it makes me think that there's no clear solution, there's no clear path to take. But what you've done here is you said, well, yes, we are unique, but then based on this problem, there's this solution, or
Right.
based on this attribute of your superhero character, then here's this assignment, or here's this thing that you need to be aware of, to then like you use your strengths, but also kind of keep an eye out for some of those weaknesses that might have tripped you up in the past. And so with this idea, this concept, some of these things we've unpacked here, what do you think people are really missing these days when they're trying to be their best self and overcome adversity? Is there like a number one mistake in all your travels that you keep seeing people make, that we all need to sit up and pay attention to you and not make this mistake?
Well, you've actually already hit on it earlier in the talk, and that's comparing yourself to other people. Yes, we all have two eyes, two ears, a nose, a mouth, but as we know, with all these common elements, we are individual and unique. And so comparing yourself against the person with the wrong criteria, so to speak, can lead you down a very dark path of self-doubt, envy, jealousy, not following your purpose, not fulfilling your purpose, right? Missing out on doing the thing that you were brought to earth to do, right? And so I think I would say that's sort of the number one thing that's happening today. And a lot of it is due to social media, whether it's the Instagram photos or the Facebook photos or Snapchat or whatever, that is leading you to believe that people have these perfect lives. If you think about people sometimes say you should never, well, a coach of mine just told me this the other day, actually, you should never post the first picture you take, because it needs to have some editing and the lighting. And I'm thinking about all the pictures that I've snapped and posted because I liked it, not because I wanted other people to like it. And so a lot of people are doing it for the likes, and you get confused. You don't know what that means. You don't know the intentions behind it. Are people liking you? Are they laughing at you? Are they not liking you because they don't want you to be celebrated? Like you could just wrap yourself around a horrible, a web and get lost in that. I just think people, the sooner you can just take a breath, I won't call it lazy, I'll call it reflect. Spend some time every day to just reflect. Take time out to take one of these diagnostic tests, whether it be I focus in, like I said, on conflicts, dynamics, and emotional intelligence. Those were the two that helped me the most. I also do some work with another test that I reserve for sort of my exclusive clients. And we dig into these very specifically so that people know who they are. And then they can go off into the world and do what they want to with the information. They can customize it to their lives. And that has been most successful.
Interesting. And so what I'm hearing from you is that we need to be less caught up in the day to day. I mean, doing the day to day activities and work is great, but also leave some empty space in there, like you said, to reflect, to think about things, to let things process. And so that way we can maybe break out of some of these cycles and not make the same mistakes and see new possibilities, opportunities. And what I've been getting a lot from our discussion today and from your answers is that many times you just need to look at things a different way. And many times you don't have all the information. You look on Facebook, you look on Instagram, and up until now you have these assumptions, but you're missing on this key piece of information that a lot of people are doing a lot of work just to make that perfect photograph. They might be spending half their day just to post one photograph.
Right.
And here you are comparing this photograph that you took 10 seconds to make, and you're thinking, well, why is there's perfect every time? Because you're seeing like one of 50. So there's a lot of things to think about, and life is always throwing things at you, but luckily you can just like take one each day as it comes to you. But as long as we like have a strategy and think things through ahead of time. And so now that you've given us a lot of things to mentally chew on, how does someone know if they're the kind of person that should reach out to you, and how do they reach out to you? How do they contact you, and how do they take the next step here?
Oh, right. Great question. So again, I told you what I do is offered and available to everyone. I mean, there's no secret sauce here in terms of diagnostics, right? I do offer emotion intelligence testing and conflict dynamics profiling as well. People who come in with other tests that they've taken, whether it be the DISC or MBTI, those are readily available. I don't particularly, I'm not a practitioner of those exams, but those do help and sort of feed into the conversation. Happy to have one-on-one coaching sessions. If they go to my website, which is my name, .com, they should, we can set up a time to meet. I'll give you my contact information as well, so that people can send me a text if they prefer that, and someone on my team will get back to them as soon as possible. And that would be 678-948-6390.
All right. And to make sure that everyone can get to that website as well, I'll spell out your name real quick. That is SimoniaBlassingame. SimoniaBlassingame.com is the place to go. Like Simonia said, if you have previously done diagnostics, bring those to her. She loves data. And it seems like just from this whole thought process here, you love kind of using the data as a tool to then make kind of like maybe somewhat unique or somewhat emotional or somewhat thought out decisions. That way we have both parts of the coin, right? You have the science of the test taking and the results, but then also the art of kind of weighing pros and cons and figuring out what the next step is for you as far as doing better in the workplace, emotional intelligence, whatever problem that you're trying to solve. And SimoniaBlassingame.com is the place to go. And in these last few seconds here, Simonia, as we wind down, wrap up, do you have any parting words for people here? Or do you have anything that like you wish you'd heard 10, 20 years ago? Anything like that come to mind?
Sure. I just want to tell your listeners and folks who are on this journey, these are already the right kind of people, right? You're already investing in yourself by listening to this podcast. But I want you to know that you are enough, that you are perfect the way you are, that yes, we all have room to grow, but you were sent on earth for a specific person. And as we mentioned, there are thousands of superheroes in the Marvel universe. There are millions of superheroes walking amongst us on earth, and you're one of them. So I just encourage you to keep learning, keep growing, tap into your superpowers, show up the way we need you to, and bring your gifts and talents to the table. And I can't wait to meet you.